I always knew the neighborhood was under the iron grip of a ridiculous HOA, but I never thought they could outdo themselves in sheer stupidity. Yet somehow they did. And at the center of this disaster, none other than her, the self-appointed supreme sheriff of the neighborhood, as if she'd been born into the role. The same woman who spent her days slapping homeowners with absurd fines and organizing endless, pointless meetings about what shades of curtains were acceptable. But this time, her obsession with rules nearly cost my daughter her life. It was supposed to be just another ordinary afternoon. My daughter was playing in the living room when, out of nowhere, she started feeling sick. At first, I figured it was nothing serious, but within seconds, she was gasping for air. Her face went pale, her lips darkened to a bluish purple. Every parent's worst nightmare unfolding before my eyes. I didn't hesitate. I called 911, trying to stay composed while my mind screamed at me to act fast. The paramedics assured me they were on their way. All I could do was pray they got here in time. But I never could have imagined that the biggest obstacle that day wouldn't be time, traffic, or fate. It would be one woman with a God complex the size of the universe. The ambulance arrived in record time, which should have been good news. But there was a problem. My house sat near the neighborhood's common area, and unfortunately, that meant one thing. She was in control. And like some self-proclaimed guardian of absolute order, she stood right there in the middle of the street, arms crossed, staring at the paramedics like they were a bunch of teenagers trying to sneak into an exclusive club. Then came the moment that defied all logic. She raised her hand like some traffic cop at an imaginary intersection and announced that the ambulance wasn't allowed to enter. That's right, an ambulance. One that was here to save a child's life. The driver rolled down the window, confused. One of the paramedics, his voice edged with urgency, explained that this was a medical emergency. They needed to get inside immediately. But this woman, this walking monument to idiocy, actually had the audacity to say that rules were rules. Emergency vehicles, according to her, needed prior authorization before entering the neighborhood. I heard all of this from my front door while my daughter was struggling to breathe on the couch. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. I sprinted to the gate, shouting at the top of my lungs that my daughter was in trouble. Her response? A masterclass in arrogance. If we make an exception, then everyone will want to break the rules. Because apparently, in this woman's deranged mind, calling ambulances for fun was a common pastime. The paramedic kept trying to reason with her, but she wasn't budging. Instead, she pointed at some email, some bureaucratic nonsense, claiming that any unregistered vehicle needed prior approval from the HOA, as if medical emergencies came with a scheduled appointment. My desperation boiled into rage. I wanted to storm across that street and move her out of the way myself if that's what it took. My child was fighting to breathe, and this lunatic was playing a power trip against trained professionals trying to save a life. And then, as if she hadn't already cemented her place as the worst human being on the planet, she made the single worst decision of her life. She pulled out her phone, but not to call for help, not to summon backup, not to do anything remotely useful. She called the neighborhood security. That's when things went completely off the rails. If someone had told me I'd one day witness a person physically blocking emergency responders from saving a child because rules are rules, I would have laughed in their face, called it an exaggeration. But there I was, living it in real time, watching my daughter struggle to breathe while the HOA president stood there like some robotic bureaucrat, repeating her nonsense like an NPC in a video game. And then she doubled down. She picked up the phone again and called security, as if the paramedics were trying to rob a bank instead of saving a dying child. The paramedics were floored. The ambulance driver even got out of the vehicle, trying one last time to reason with her. "Ma'am, this is a medical emergency. We need to go in now." Her response? A masterclass in unfiltered stupidity. All vehicles need prior approval to enter residential areas. We can't make exceptions. Exceptions. Because apparently, between following HOA traffic rules and saving a child's life, she believed the rules were more important. Meanwhile, inside my house, my daughter was getting worse. Every breath was a struggle, the wheezing growing louder. I knew we were running out of time. But the HOA president? She stood her ground, arms folded, planted in the middle of the road, ready to fight. No, ready to let someone die, for the sake of her precious rulebook. And then, like clockwork, the neighborhood security finally arrived. Two guys in matching polo shirts, radios clipped to their belts, with the self-importance of men who took their job way too seriously but probably couldn't jog 10 feet without getting winded. They rolled up in their little electric cart, hopped off like they were about to break up a major crime scene. And the worst part? The way they talked. That fake, measure calm. The kind of voice people use when they think they're negotiating a high-stakes international peace deal, instead of, actively blocking a medical rescue. Is there a problem here? One of them asked. Yeah, genius. There was a problem. The problem was that while they were standing around, debating whether or not a big red truck with a siren could enter their oh-so-sacred neighborhood, my daughter was inside my house, gasping for air. I was beyond furious. The problem is my daughter needs help, and this woman is stopping the ambulance from getting in. The security guards exchanged glances. They knew this was insane. But, like good little disciples, one of them turned to her before saying a word. And guess what? She already had her phone in her hand, holding up an email, some HOA decree, some useless policy, just to prove that, technically, she was following the rules. The security guard let out a dismissive snort, fiddled with the radio on his belt, and delivered his verdict. Look, sir, we get that you're worried, but there's a procedure in place at this condominium. We can't just let any vehicle through without proper authorization. Any vehicle? Was he seriously calling an ambulance? Flashing lights, blaring sirens, uniformed EMTs responding to a 911 emergency. Just any vehicle? Something inside me snapped right then. I couldn't tell if it was rage, despair, or just sheer disbelief at the insanity unfolding before me. But I lost it. I didn't just yell out of frustration or anger. I screamed in desperation. Because while these idiots were playing bureaucratic games, my daughter was fighting for her life. That must have been the last straw for the paramedics, because their patience finally ran out. What happened next was equal parts terrifying and magnificent. The driver climbed back into the ambulance, threw it into gear, and gunned it forward. Just like that. No more waiting for the blessing of some power-hungry HOA tyrant or a couple of security guards who had no real authority to begin with. And Karen? Oh, Karen absolutely lost it. She shrieked and flung herself in front of the ambulance, like some tragic movie heroine sacrificing herself for the sanctity of the neighborhood. The security guard made a feeble attempt to hold her back, but she was in full meltdown mode, wailing as if she were being physically attacked. This is illegal. You can't just force your way in like this. The paramedics had officially had enough. Chaos erupted. The ambulance barreled forward, Karen went ballistic, and suddenly she was waving her phone around, screeching threats about lawsuits and HOA violations. The security guard stood there, caught between pretending not to see the madness or actually trying to intervene. Meanwhile, I bolted inside, leading the medics straight to my daughter. By the time they got to her, she was barely hanging on. Those seconds, waiting while they assessed her condition, prepped their equipment, and began emergency treatment, were the longest and most excruciating of my life. I stood in the doorway, watching as they worked to stabilize her, while outside, the circus continued. You're breaking the rules. I'm taking legal action. Karen bellowed, her voice shrill with self-righteous indignation. One of the security guards tried to talk her down. Ma'am, maybe we should check with the HOA before escalating this further. Escalating? My kid was dying in there, and they wanted to have a committee meeting about it. I swear, at that moment, it hit me. Some people truly live in a different reality. The ambulance was finally ready to roll when one of the paramedics turned to me. Do you want to ride with us? I didn't even answer, just let out a grunt of sheer exhaustion as I climbed in. And Karen? She was still planted there, gripping her phone like it was a weapon, recording what she probably thought was the scandal of the century. This isn't over, she hollered. And you know what? She was right. But she had no clue what was coming for her. Inside the ambulance, my daughter was stable but still weak. My heart felt like it might burst from my chest, but thanks to the medics, she was at least safe, for now. Even so, the fear didn't leave me. Not until I knew for certain she was out of danger. As we sped through the neighborhood, I glanced out the window, and there she was, the woman who had nearly killed my child over red tape. Arms crossed, nostrils flaring, phone clutched in her fist, probably already composing some indignant email about the illegal ambulance invasion. She had no idea she was digging her own grave. On the way to the hospital, only one thought consumed me. She had to pay for this. Not just morally, legally. Once we arrived, the doctors immediately took over. It was a severe allergic reaction, but now that she was under proper care, the risk had drastically decreased. Still, the thought of what could have happened if we'd been delayed even a few more minutes made my stomach turn. So, as the doctors worked, I did something I rarely do. I sat down, took a deep breath, and tried to collect my thoughts. This woman was not getting away with it. Not this time. I picked up my phone and called the police. The conversation was brief and direct. No fluff, no hesitation. I want to report someone for obstructing a medical emergency. The dispatcher on the other end listened carefully, asked a few key questions, and then finally said the first thing all night that made me feel like justice might actually be served. "Sir, this is serious. We'll send a unit right away." Good. Now all that was left was to wait and watch the bomb go off. Less than an hour later, my phone rang. A cop was already outside the condominium, gathering details. And guess who was front and center, ready to spin her version of events? Karen. She had the audacity to get ahead of the story, whining to the officers about how outsiders were disrespecting HOA rules and how she was just protecting the community from unauthorized intruders. In her mind, she was the noble gatekeeper of some fantasy kingdom. The police weren't buying it. As soon as they started taking statements from the paramedics, from the neighbors who had witnessed everything, the truth came down on her like a sledgehammer. Not only did the ambulance have every legal right to enter, but her actions could be classified as obstruction of emergency services, which, in case she hadn't figured it out yet, was a crime. By the time I arrived, I made sure to add every relevant detail. My daughter could have died because this woman decided to play sheriff. The officer gave me a look. He didn't need to say it. It was already obvious that this wasn't going to end well for her. And then, the final nail in the coffin. One of the paramedics, who had somehow kept his cool through all of this, finally spoke up, and his words cut through the air like a knife. "I've been responding to emergencies for 10 years, and I have never seen anything this reckless. This woman endangered a child's life over some ridiculous HOA rule. If this had gone differently, she'd be facing manslaughter charges." Karen's face drained of color. That was the moment she realized this time. She wasn't getting away with it. The officer didn't even hesitate. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come down to the station for further questioning." And then, the theatrics began. "This is an abuse of power. You can't do this to me," she shrieked. But, for once, no one was listening. "I'm the president of the whole. So what?" After they hauled her off to the police station, I thought I'd finally be able to breathe easy. But I clearly underestimated just how unhinged a bunch of retired busybodies running a homeowners association like it's a religious cult could be. The next morning, an email lands in my inbox. "Dear resident, a serious violation of HOA regulations was identified during yesterday's medical emergency. The homeowner permitted an unauthorized vehicle to enter, blatantly disregarding community rules. As a result, a fine of $5,000 will be imposed for this severe infraction. Sincerely, the Association of Residents from Hell." That's right. These lunatics had the audacity to fine me because an ambulance dared to enter our neighborhood without first receiving the HOA's sacred blessing. I had to reread that email 3 times just to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. And in that moment, my frustration shifted. It was no longer just about that one woman. Now it was about all of them. "Fine. You want to fight? You've got one." I picked up my phone and made my second call of the day to my lawyer. I laid it all out. How they obstructed the ambulance. How they hit me with an outrageous fine just to punish me for calling the cops. His reaction was a mix of disbelief and excitement. My God, are they naturally this dumb, or do they practice? I couldn't help but laugh. For the first time since this mess started, I felt like things were finally turning in my favor. My lawyer knew exactly what to do. First, he formally challenged the fine, pointing out that trying to prevent medical assistance wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. And that fine? Nothing more than petty retaliation for me standing up to them. But he didn't stop there. Man, we're taking this all the way. Not just against her, we're suing the entire HOA. And that's exactly what we did. We filed a lawsuit for obstruction of emergency services, emotional distress, and abuse of authority. And we weren't asking for pocket change. We were coming for damages so steep they'd feel it in their wallets. Oh, and we made sure to loop in the local media. Because if there's one thing an HOA fears more than a lawsuit, it's bad press. And I already had my next move planned. They thought they could intimidate me with fines and nonsense rules. They had no idea who they were messing with. The HOA was about to come crumbling down. See, they were used to ruling through threats, fines, official letters, and that smug "we own you" attitude. But me? They picked the wrong guy to push around. Word spread fast. Neighbors started talking. Some were on my side. Others, still worshiping at the altar of the HOA, mumbled rules exist for a reason, like saving a kid's life was somehow negotiable. Then my lawyer decided to really twist the knife. He didn't just go after the woman who blocked the ambulance. He went after the entire HOA, arguing that the fine was not only unjust, but outright illegal retaliation. And the cherry on top? He tipped off the press. The next day, one of the city's biggest newspapers ran the headline, "HOA blocks ambulance, nearly cost child's life." The article laid it all bare. The name of the association. The ridiculous way the security guards tried to stop the paramedics. The outrageous fine they tried to stick me with. And of course, the queen of HOA hell, the former president, now the poster child for arrogance and incompetence. Before, this scandal was just a neighborhood issue. Now, the entire city knew who she was. And the best part? It hit the HOA board like a freight train. Because as power-hungry as these groups get, they all have one fatal weakness: money. Their entire existence depends on the residents' dues. And nothing drains a community's trust faster than a public scandal. Rumors started flying that property values were taking a hit because of the bad press. And that was the beginning of the end. A few days later, another email from the HOA landed in my inbox. "Dear residents, due to recent events that have affected our community, we would like to inform you that the current HOA president, Ms. Karen, has chosen to resign. Additionally, we will be reviewing all emergency response policies to prevent similar situations in the future. Sincerely, the Association of Residents of She Fell." The woman who spent years ruling this place like her personal kingdom? Now she was nothing more than a punchline. But I wasn't finished. My lawsuit against the HOA was still pending, and my lawyer wasn't about to let them wiggle out of it. They tried to offer me a settlement, hoping I'd walk away quietly. But I was already deep in the fight, and I wasn't about to settle for anything less than full victory. So I told them, drop the fine, pay damages, and we'll talk. And guess what? I won. The HOA had to cough up a serious payout. And the new board, clearly eager to wash their hands of this disaster, went out of their way to send me an official apology. But the story wasn't over. Karen, despite losing her title, tried to stick around like nothing had happened. But did the neighbors forget? Not a chance. First, it started with small, silent reminders. Someone would leave a printed copy of the news article on her doorstep. Anonymous letters would show up in her mailbox with messages like, "HOA above human life, huh?" Then came the social freeze. No one spoke to her anymore. At community events, people looked the other way. Even the bootlickers who once worshipped her pretended she didn't exist. And then, one day, she was just gone. House up for sale. Moved out. Where did she go? Who cares? What mattered was that, for the first time, the HOA lost. For the first time, someone stood up to their nonsense and won. And my daughter? She made a full recovery. But one thing in this neighborhood changed forever. Now everyone knew that if someone needed help, no HOA rule would ever stand in the way again. If you liked this story, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button.